Hello there, Super Wild Jellyfish here, and today I'm going to be reviewing the third studio album by post-punk band Viagra Boys. Viagra Boys are a Swedish rock band that formed in 2015, and they have been releasing music since 2016. Now, I will be transparent here, this is my first Viagra Boys album, so I won't be able to draw any comparisons or recall any personal history with the band like I did in my last video, but I have covered new artists on the channel before, so I am familiar with approaching work from newly discovered artists. So why am I reviewing Cave World exactly? Well, my experience with this album was quite interesting because it wasn't a case of instant love. My first listens to Big Boy, Ain't No Thief and Baby Criminal were not the best, as I found myself wanting more from the overall sound, and the vocals were not something I was a huge fan of. After one failed attempt to listen to the album, I wrote it off as something that I understand why others like, but I can't really get into myself. However, I found myself longing to give this another shot, especially when Big Boy grew on me immensely. I had a long train journey ahead of me on July 18th, so I threw on Cave World to give it one more shot before dismissing it for good. And since I'm now reviewing the project, his clear dismissal was far from the end result. Cave World is one of the most surprisingly exciting records of 2022, featuring engaging stories, vocals that heavily reminded me of the kind you'd hear on a Tropical Fuckstorm or Big Black project, and instrumentation that's infectiously groovy. When this album hooks you, it's incredibly hard to stop listening to it, so I'll do my best to explain what makes this album so great, and why you should give it a shot, or give it another if you initially wrote it off like I did. Baby Criminal opens the album with the fascinating and dark tale of Jimmy, a boy who started life as an innocent child but grew to become an insane criminal. Every element of the instrumentation is as crazy as the character portrayed here, featuring a mix of blasting sax, wild drums and electronic production that's hard not to boogie to. It's a shining example of what the dance punk genre can bring to music. Fun and lively instrumentals with themes relevant to the culture of today. The track details each stage of Jimmy's life, his estranged childhood, his problematic teens and his arrest. When the cops found him, they said that he was trying to build a nuclear device. His mother's confusion in the bridge is one of the darkly comedic moments in the track, as she states, "What happened to my little boy? Oh, it's so fucking sad. He used to be a little baby, and now he's such a great man now." I find this part especially interesting, mainly through the concept of perspective. From our perspective, it's clear how Jimmy ended up this way. There's so many red flags like crazy drawings, microwaving batteries, killing a squirrel for a new hat, and joining a gang that hint to Jimmy being crazy enough to become an insane criminal, while his mother finds it unexplainable that her baby boy turned out this way. The track is a critique of parents who tend to bat a blind eye to their child's strange behaviour and points out the lunacy of their confused cries. I especially love the singing Sebastian brings to the track. It's so manic and fun to follow along to, working in tandem with the instrumental. While I wouldn't call Cave World a concept album, Cave World's themes are interconnected between a majority of the track list, the most major themes revolving around conspiracy, apes, and a critique of modern-day America. Frontman Sebastian Murphy said in an interview via Apple Music, "I definitely use the States as a reference point because it's a real melting pot of insanity, in my opinion. I mean, those type of people definitely exist here in Sweden, but they're not storming the capital or anything. A large majority of the characters and concepts Viagra Boys play around with on this album are the craziest of the bunch, far-right conspiracy nutjobs, and internet idiots turned shooters being a couple examples of such. I personally believe that when it comes to implementing politics into any form of media, there is a right and wrong way to approach it. A good example would be Idol's Joys and Active Resistance and Ultra Mono, albums which dive into many political themes with witty and blunt lyrics, while still providing stellar and catchy track lists. While a bad example would be You Need to Calm Down by Taylor Swift, a song where Taylor tries to compare her hardships with haters to the bigotry and hatred levied towards the LGBT plus community, which feels like You and Me but mostly me from the Book of Mormon without the irony. Cave World falls into the right way of implementing politics, telling interesting stories that include lyrics that tie back to known issues in the world, while never betraying its absurdist tone. Cave Hole is one of the 3 short interlude tracks found on the project, and its bubbly synths transition perfectly into the next track, Troglodyte. The hi-hats gradually rising in volume at the end of Cave Hole change into a groovy, fast-paced beat, and Troglodyte offers some of the best and fun production on the entire project. The song talks about a bitter, hateful man who's going to become a workplace shooter, and how his murderous tendencies would have had excluded him from the other apes millions of years ago. It's the first track that dives into our origins as a species, and uses our origins as a reference point to point out how insane the modern world is. The man is described, "Yeah, you were still a troglodyte. You just never the bit too late. You're a troglodyte.
Troglodyte,
which is a quirky and accurate portrayal of the fake news science-denying culture found in the States. Punk Rock Loser follows this, a track detailing an egotistical asshole talking about how cool and loose he is. It's a slow yet wild tune with a really grimy western vibe, funnily enough portrayed in the music video. Vocals on this track are quite different to the others. I do enjoy them, but they sound a lot lower in tone and less expressive than other tracks, which leaves me wanting a bit more from them. The lyrics and instrumentation of this track, however, do sound fantastic, so it's always a blast to come back to every time. Now, Creepy Crawlers is one of the most interesting tracks on the entire project. It's more of a spoken word track with an instrumental that starts subdued, but then is let off the chain after Sebastian goes, The reason it's so interesting is because Creepy Crawlers is a parody of far-right extremist conspiracy, spreading misinformation about vaccines, lizard people, and harvesting babies. Fun fact, by the way, the track was so convincing in what it was parodying that YouTube removed the official track from the site as misinformation, which is one of the funniest and impressive accomplishments I've seen from an artist. Although, seriously, YouTube, it's obviously a parody, you should bring it back to the platform. Sebastian sounds like Psychic Pebbles losing his mind on this track, especially during the lines,
It's ruined because you voted on the wrong motherfucker. I told you they're harvesting babies for adrenochrome.
and I find it to be both hilarious and kinda terrifying. It's funny because Crazy Man is saying crazy things, but the main thing that makes it terrifying is how there are real people in the world that believe and act like this. Sebastian saying that the vaccine causing kids to grow tails and animal hair wasn't even made up for the track, but was directly quoted from an interview on Channel 5 News. The cognitive trade-off hypothesis, based on a documentary about chimps that has the same title, was originally a track that I wasn't huge on, as I found it was quite repetitive and linear in its subject matter. But on repeat listens of the album, I found its placement and meaning to be one of the album's highlights. The track details our lives millions of years ago, as we lost all our hair from our bodies, learned to speak, and traded our short-term memories with long-term. The track's got a real animalistic nature, with the vocals sounding distorted and messed up, while a collage of instruments drive a slow, nauseating groove. The track is repetitive, but it's not to its detriment. It's trying to hammer its point across that we lost a part of ourselves, and via the same Apple Music interviews, Sebastian states, "My idea is, that's what's fucked us. Long-term memories gave us the ability to plan murder and shit like that. Monkeys don't think about that. They live in the now." Globe Earth is the second interlude, and the title is in reference to flat earthers referring to normal people as globe earthers like it's some sort of insult. It's probably my favourite of the three interludes, mainly because it builds up to the next track even better than Cavehole did. And these next two tracks are probably my favourites on the entire album, and I'll start with Ain't No Thief. Ain't No Thief is one of the loudest tracks on the album, taking influence from industrial noise rock and injecting dance punk into its sound and lyrics. It's a humorous ride detailing a no-good protagonist who clearly steals from multiple people and comes up with excuses that only further incriminate him. His retorts are some of the album's best lyrical highlights, such as,
And she gave it to me as a gift. So quit bitching, motherfucker. I ain't no thief. We just got the same stuff.
Instrumentally, I adore this track. It pummels the listener with the kind of sounds that are fit on a Songs About Fucking cut, while blasting your ears with drums, guitars, and electronics that are hard to not start dancing to. All of this completely contrasted on the weirdest track on the entire album, Big Boy. This track has a repetitious flow and lyrical theme, that being of the protagonist feeling like an adult who owns an apartment and pays his rent, while coming off as a child due to his childish justifications. Most of the lines has Sebastian stretching at the ends in a real blues-like fashion, and while I found it rather grating and unappealing on first listen, its charm grew on me over time. This is the only track that features a collaborator, as it includes Jason Williamson at the tail end of the track. He reaffirms the protagonist's claims, with the charismatic wit and energy going,
Yeah, that's right. He's a big boy. Yeah, it's Captain Daddy. In a world full of privileged villains, let's have a real buddy.
ADD was referenced on the cognitive trade-off hypothesis, so ADD is the track that details Sebastian's experience with the disorder, as he's had since his teens. It's one of the most electronic tracks on the album, giving off a real space-like atmosphere to the track, which ties into the lyrics' details of what ADD causes to Sebastian. It's a rather interesting and immersive dive into the frontman's psyche, and it's clearly the most personal track here. While I like what the track is going for, it is probably my least favourite here, mainly because of it being repetitive to its detriment. I feel the main hook could have been replaced with more details into the disorder, as I found it to be one of the more interesting aspects of the track. But overall, I still do enjoy the track as it serves its purpose well, and I am a big fan of the electronic sound of it. The final interlude, Human Error, gets the listener ready for the closer, building up with the repeated chant, and it smoothly transitions into the 6-minute and 28-second beast brilliantly titled Return to Monkey. This track is easily the loudest one on the entire project, making Ain't No Thief look like nothing. Every element of the instrumental is cranked up to 11, ending the album on an explosive note which ties all of the themes of the album together. It details how all of the insane characters portrayed throughout the album should leave everything behind and live in the jungle for the rest of their lives, as the rest of the world would do better off without them. The lines,
We spend our time throwing shit at each other or just hanging out masturbating.
suggest that this jungle would be an echo chamber for them, throwing their shit ideas around and wanking off to the prospect of their own twisted utopia. Before the outro, there's an interesting verse detailing a murder taking place in Japan, and it takes a heavy focus less on the murder, but more so on the cleanup. The final line of the verse
It's been a good day.
is a rather haunting line, as it suggests that people should focus more on the covering up of the murder instead of the actual murder itself. The interpretation of what I draw from this links back to the album being a critique of the States. Gun violence, for example, is a rather prevalent occurrence in the States, and it's usually the opinion of the news and politicians higher up that matter before the general public. The way I interpret this verse is that the whole idea of
Everything is put back to normal.
is the process of everything returning back to the status quo before the next tragedy occurs. The outro ends the track on just as much of a haunting note. The jungle got to everyone's heads, and now they've reverted back to how we acted millions of years ago, killing each other with sticks, bones, and old pieces of mud. The album ends with the line,
You're killing each other out here.
overall, Cave World is a fascinating dive into the crazy world of post-pandemic America, with each and every track offering distinct and memorable sounds and themes. While I think the interludes aren't entirely necessary, and ADD could have offered a bit more, every other track offers so many wild and absurdist moments that I'm sure will captivate the hearts of many listeners. I'm feeling a light to decent 9 on this project, and I'm incredibly excited to dive into Viagra Boys' previous works, and I look forward to seeing whatever they make next. This has been Super Wild Jellyfish, and may you strive to be your wild self.